They said the dead can't whisper, but in Copper Ridge, they did. 17 bodies buried under the snow, and every one of them a message. A warning to anyone who would dare uncover what truly happened there in the winter of 1874. You were never meant to hear this. The territorial records call it a mining accident. But the miners didn't die from cave-ins or bad air. They died because one woman found out the truth about her husband and about herself. Her name was Martha Kellerman, 24 years old, intelligent, fierce, a schoolteacher turned wife, turned witness to something the human mind was never meant to see. Her husband, Thomas, wasn't who he said he was. He wasn't even who he believed he was. When she uncovered his secret, the mountains seemed to shift around her. The settlement, a remote, wind-scarred scar of civilization 11,000 feet above sea level, began to rot from the inside out. Men vanished. Livestock was found mutilated. Children spoke of voices in the snow. And when the spring thaw came, 17 graves waited beneath the frost. But let's go back before the madness, before the deaths, before Martha learned that her husband was also her brother. No one knows exactly how the lie began. Some say the Kellermans were part of a government relocation program for orphans displaced after the Great Chicago Fire. Others claim they were subjects of something older, an unspoken experiment in bloodline preservation carried out by men who believed purity could be engineered through isolation. The town itself, Copper Ridge, wasn't just a mining camp. It was a test site, a social crucible built on secrecy, hunger, and dependence. When the trains stopped bringing supplies, the townsfolk didn't question it. When the mail never came, they assumed the passes were snowed in. But someone made sure those lines were severed. Someone wanted them to turn inward to create their own rules, their own gods, their own sins. And they did. Martha's marriage to Thomas wasn't an accident of fate. It was the result of generations of manipulation, a hidden hand guiding bloodlines toward reunion, not separation. You see, Copper Ridge wasn't founded to mine copper. It was founded to mine control. And the vein they struck went far deeper than ore. It went into the human soul. Stay with me, because what Martha found next rewrote everything she thought she knew about love, family, and what it means to be human. It began with the sound of something breaking. A small wooden box striking the cabin floor, its latch snapping open like a wound. Martha would remember that sound for the rest of her life. She would say later, in one of her few surviving letters, that it was the moment her heart split in two and began to rot. Inside the box were the fragments of a life her husband swore he never had. A rusted pocket watch, a silver coin from 1868, and several old documents, letters written in two different hands. But it was the photograph that stopped her breath. A daguerreotype, a frozen family, a mother, a father, and two children. The boy's face was unmistakable. Thomas, 10 years old. But the girl beside him, she had her eyes. The same tilt of the mouth, the same faint scar near the temple from when she'd fallen on ice as a child. At first, she thought it impossible. Delirium from childbirth, perhaps. But the more she stared, the more the air around her seemed to constrict, as though the cabin itself was holding its breath. When Thomas returned that evening, she asked him a single question. "Who is the girl?" He froze, his face drained of color. Then, with a voice so calm it terrified her, he said, "You shouldn't have opened that." That night, he told her fragments of the truth, or what his mind could bear to remember. The Kellermans were not his birth family. They were caretakers, chosen by a man who came through Illinois years ago offering placement for orphans of suitable heritage. Thomas and a young girl had been separated, sent to different households, but bound by a mark, a geometric seal inked at the base of their spines when they were children. Martha didn't believe him, not fully, until she looked. The mark was there, on him, and on her, a black sigil, circular, divided into 12 segments like the face of a clock. Inside it, an inverted tree whose roots curled upward, as if feeding on the heavens. Thomas wept when she saw it. He said he didn't remember the ceremony, only the pain. That he'd been told the mark meant protection, that their kind had a purpose in a world of chaos. But the truth was worse. That symbol wasn't for protection. It was a claim. and the people who branded them weren't saviors. They were part of a society that believed humanity could only be purified by returning the bloodline to itself, a belief born from old European mysticism and perfected through American isolationism. The Kellermans weren't husband and wife by chance. They were the culmination of a century-long design, the controlled breeding of a spiritual bloodline meant to preserve an ancient pattern of obedience. Martha understood, in that moment, that her life, her love, even her child were products of someone else's experiment. And the worst part? The experiment wasn't over. Outside the cabin, the wind rose like a voice. Some of the miners swore later that on that night, they heard a woman screaming. Others said it wasn't a scream at all, it was laughter. The next morning, Thomas was gone. And so began the unraveling of Copper Ridge. The morning after Thomas vanished, Copper Ridge was silent. Not the natural silence of snow or distance, this was engineered. A silence so total that it seemed to watch her. Martha wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped outside. The mountain air was razor sharp, cutting through her lungs like glass. The entire town felt wrong, the kind of wrong that hums beneath the skin. Curtains moved when she passed. Faces turned away too quickly. Men who once tipped their hats now crossed the street. Something had shifted in them overnight, as though they already knew what she had found. By noon, she went to the only place she thought might still contain truth: the old assay office. It had been built by the town's founder, Samuel Brennan, a man who claimed to have prospected half of the Rockies before the war. But Brennan wasn't in Copper Ridge for copper. He'd been sent there by an organization called the Society for Anthropological Purity, a name that appeared nowhere in official records, but everywhere in the letters she found inside his office desk. They weren't mining, or they were mining lineage. Martha read page after page of coded reports, dates, birth records, shipments that weren't labeled as supplies, but as transfers. Each shipment correlated to the arrival of new residents, always orphans, always between the ages of 8 and 12. The documents used cold, technical terms, subject integration, blood alignment, generation interval, and then one phrase that made her knees weaken: Kellerman sequence phase 4, convergence achieved. It was dated the same week she married Thomas. Her hands trembled. Her mind tried to deny what she was reading, but her body already knew. It was her. She was part of something vast, orchestrated, and sickeningly deliberate. Then she saw the seal, the same 12-pointed sigil burned into the paper. Only this version was encircled by Latin words. Intra te redeo, I return within myself. Martha's breath caught. That was the purpose, the doctrine that governed the society. To return humanity inward, to fold the bloodline until it devoured itself, until no impurity, no outsider, remained. It wasn't religion. It was control, a biological theology of ownership. As she turned the final page, a slip of paper fell from between the ledgers. It was a map, the mountain rendered in charcoal and red ink. Beneath, Copper Ridge tunnels, chambers, and a single word scrawled in the center of the page: Haven. That night, Martha made her decision. She would go there. She would descend into the tunnels to find out what had been done to her child, to everyone trapped in that godless experiment. But she wasn't alone. As she left her cabin, she saw them. Figures standing at the edge of the street, faces covered in cloth, watching her with perfect stillness. One of them spoke, a woman's voice, soft, almost tender. It's time to come home, Martha. That was when she understood the society hadn't lost control of Copper Ridge. It had never left. Before dawn, she descended into the tunnels with a lantern, a pistol, and the photograph of 2 children who never should have met again. The entrance to the tunnels was hidden beneath the abandoned blacksmith's shed, a narrow stairwell descending into stone, sealed behind rusted iron. Someone had tried to bury it, but time has a way of loosening even the deepest secrets. Martha struck a match and lowered her lantern into the dark. The air that rose from below was ancient, damp, metallic, almost sweet. She hesitated only once. Then she stepped down. Each footfall echoed like a confession. The walls closed around her, carved with precision, not the rough cuts of miners, but deliberate architectural design. There were symbols etched into the stone, geometric circles, spirals within spirals, lines that formed impossible patterns when the lantern light shifted. And every few yards, she found something else. Doors, small, metal, numbered. Behind them chambers filled with objects that didn't belong in any mine. Old cribs, rusted surgical instruments, jars of preserved specimens. Bones. The deeper she went, the colder it became. Not the cold of temperature, but of memory, like walking into the mind of something that remembered its own birth. Then she reached the largest chamber, the one marked on the map as Haven. The ceiling was vaulted, cathedral-like. The walls were lined with glass coffers containing records, diagrams, and something that looked disturbingly like family trees branching, intertwining, looping back upon themselves until names merged, repeating endlessly. Each one ended in the same mark, the inverted tree sigil. In the center of the chamber stood an altar of stone. Upon it lay a massive book bound in human skin, its pages filled with delicate handwriting signatures, dates, and beside them, numbers that looked like measurements. And then something more horrifying. Portraits, hundreds of them, painted, drawn, photographed faces from different centuries, different continents. Yet all of them shared familiar features. Eyes, jawlines, subtle details repeating again and again through time, converging in the same configuration. Her configuration. Martha touched the glass, trembling. Some of the portraits were marked with titles: Eve of Renewal, Subject 12A, the line preserved, and beneath them, a single name, Sinclair, her maiden name. The revelation shattered her. Her entire lineage had been cultivated, not born, not chosen, but designed. The society hadn't just engineered marriages. They'd bred souls, shaping personality, temperament, even moral inclination to produce obedience disguised as love. Martha dropped to her knees. The truth was too vast, too monstrous to fit inside the human mind. But in the silence, something moved, a breath, faint and low, a child's cry. Her lantern flickered. In the far corner, a small wooden cradle. She approached slowly, knowing what she would see and praying to be wrong. Inside was her daughter, or rather, something that looked like her daughter. The infant's skin was pale as wax. Its eyes opened without blinking, pupils dilated, reflecting the lantern's flame in two perfect circles. And when it smiled, the movement was not human. It was learned, rehearsed. From behind her, a voice spoke, calm, almost fatherly. You see, Martha, she carries what we spent centuries perfecting. She is the convergence. The voice came from the shadows, a man in a long black coat, wearing a pendant marked with the 12-pointed sigil. Your union was not an accident, he said. It was the final alignment. Your child is what we have always sought, the mind that cannot disobey, because it does not know the difference. Martha raised the pistol with shaking hands. The man smiled. She will never belong to you. She belongs to the order now. As do you. The lantern shattered as the gun fired. Darkness swallowed the chamber. What emerged from those tunnels hours later was not the same woman who entered. The town would later say she was pale as snow, her eyes empty, her voice gone. But the records in Denver, the ones buried in territorial archives, mention something stranger. The infant was never found. By the time Martha emerged from the tunnels, dawn had turned Copper Ridge into a graveyard of frost. The wind no longer whistled through the beams, it howled, as though the mountain itself were trying to expel something unholy. She stumbled through the street barefoot, blood on her hands, the pistol still hot. No one dared approach her. The few who saw her said she looked like someone caught halfway between waking and death, eyes fixed on something far beyond the visible world. By nightfall, the first man died. Then another. Then 5 more before the week's end. They called it the sickness. But it wasn't fever. There were no rashes, no lesions, no cause that made sense to their crude medicine. The victims simply stopped eating, stopped speaking, and then, one by one, walked into the snow, disappearing without footprints. Those who survived swore it started when Martha looked at them. Her silence was contagious. Her presence carried a weight that crushed words, as if language itself bent under the gravity of what she'd seen. The town began to turn on her. Mothers crossed themselves when she passed. Men muttered that she'd brought back something from below, something that listened through her. They weren't wrong. Night she heard it. A hum beneath the earth, steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes it came through the crib where her daughter once slept. Sometimes it vibrated through the window panes, whispering phrases in a language she didn't know but somehow understood. The hum grew louder each night, and with it came the dreams. In them, she stood in the tunnels again, but this time the walls pulsed with light veins of copper glowing like arteries. Faces pressed out from the stone, dozens of them, whispering in unison. The blood remembers. When she woke, she found symbols drawn on her walls, circles and roots and trees inverted. She tried to wash them away, but they always returned by morning, etched deeper. The miners who hadn't fled gathered in the saloon to argue about what to do. Some wanted to hang her. Others insisted she was the only one who might know how to stop whatever had been unleashed. But before they could decide, the ground trembled. A low quake, not strong enough to collapse the mines, just enough to rattle the windows and spill the lanterns. When the shaking stopped, they heard something rise from the mountain's depths. A sound that was not a sound. A call. Every dog in Copper Ridge began to howl. And Martha, sitting alone in her cabin, began to smile. Not out of joy, but recognition. She realized then what the society had been trying to do wasn't just genetic. It was spiritual. They weren't breeding for obedience. They were breeding for resonance. For humans who could serve as receivers, vessels for a frequency too ancient to belong to this world. She whispered to herself, in a voice that wasn't entirely her own. The mountain isn't made of stone. It's made of memory. That night, 17 people vanished. Not a trace left behind. In the official record, their names are written as missing during storm. But the survivors, those who fled to Denver, swore that on the morning after, they saw something carved into the snow where the town had been. 12 points, a circle, and at its center, the inverted tree. The contagion wasn't disease. It was awakening, and it didn't stay in Copper Ridge. When the first survivors staggered down the mountain passes into Denver, they were half mad, half frozen, and entirely changed. They spoke in fragments, voices layered, as if something else were speaking through them. The local papers printed their story once, then never again. The official telegram from the territorial governor read only, "Settlement abandoned, winter fatalities. No further inquiry required." But some inquiries can't be killed with ink. Within weeks, a physician named Dr. Alistair began examining the survivors. He was a man of science, a skeptic of all things spiritual, until he cut open the first one. Beneath the skin, he found thin metallic threads woven along the spine. Not wire, but copper filaments, fused to nerve tissue. He wrote in his journal, "The human body has been turned into an instrument. The signal transmits even after death." Days later, his lab burned to the ground. Disappeared. And then the letters started and signed, identical handwriting, all sealed with the same 12-pointed sigil. Each envelope contained only a line of text and a coordinate. When investigators traced them, they found other settlements, ghost towns scattered across the continent. One in the Black Hills, another in the Ozarks, a third beneath the salt flats of Nevada. Every site was the same, abandoned, silent, and every one of them built over copper veins. The pattern was clear now. The society hadn't died in Copper Ridge. It had expanded. The experiment was a network, an invisible lattice of signal conductors stretching beneath the nation, pulsing through telegraph lines, railroads, even water systems. The resonance Martha had awakened wasn't confined to blood anymore. It was traveling through the infrastructure of civilization itself. That's why the miners had disappeared without footprints. That's why their bodies hummed in the dark. Martha's journals, recovered decades later, describe visions of cities built on the same grid. Their people unknowingly tuned to frequencies designed centuries before. "They will hear the call," she wrote. "They will obey, thinking it is their own thought." Sound familiar? Every headline you read, every impulse purchase, every opinion you think you arrive at on your own, they all vibrate on those same frequencies now. The bloodline was only the prototype. The real experiment was psychological. to teach entire populations to resonate in unison and call it freedom. This is the part where you decide whether you keep watching or turn away. Because what comes next isn't history, it's present tense. If you followed this far, type the phrase "the blood remembers" in the comments. Write it twice. Once for the past that was stolen and once for the part of you that's waking up. The contagion that began in Copper Ridge didn't stop in 1874. It evolved, refined, hidden behind every new technology that claimed to connect us. Connection was never the goal. Conduction was. And if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the mountain hum through the wires. The hum never vanished. It simply changed its mask. By the turn of the 20th century, the same symbols that once marked the tunnels of Copper Ridge began appearing in the patents of early communication devices etched discreetly onto circuit diagrams, woven into the geometry of radio towers, hidden beneath the floor plates of telegraph offices. A century later, those same patterns exist inside everything that carries a signal from your phone to the satellites orbiting above. It's no longer copper veins beneath mountains. It's fiber optic threads beneath oceans. The frequency didn't die. It migrated. Every government, every corporation that ever promised progress has served as a relay, knowingly or not, for that same old resonance. What began as an experiment in genetic obedience became an architecture of consent. You can feel it every time your thoughts align perfectly with a headline, every time millions of strangers rage or rejoice in perfect synchrony. They call it connectivity. It's really entrainment. In music, entrainment means one rhythm overtaking another until both beat as one. In psychology, it's the merging of brainwaves through repetition and sound. In governance, it's the art of control so complete it feels like choice. The society learned early that the human nervous system isn't just biological, it's electrical. The same copper that ran through the mines now runs through our cities. The same hum that called Martha's name now whispers through algorithmic feeds and corporate slogans. Every generation has heard it differently, as prophecy, as innovation, as progress, but the pattern never changes. A symbol resurfaces, a phrase repeats, a cycle restarts, and always the promise of safety. Safety is the melody of obedience. The few who tried to expose it found their research absorbed by private foundations, their families quietly reassigned, their work re-released under new branding. You've seen those names on your devices, your institutions, your walls. They didn't vanish. They simply professionalized the cult. You don't need faith to believe it. You only need to look at the circuitry. Every motherboard is a shrine. Every antenna, a prayer tower humming the same 12-point pattern Martha saw carved in stone. You think you're scrolling, but you're participating. You are the signal now. Sooner or later, the hum will peak again. The same convergence that destroyed Copper Ridge will repeat, scaled to billions of minds instead of hundreds. And when it happens, no one will call it a ritual. They'll call it an update. It began not with thunder, not with fire, but with a patch note. A system update rolled out quietly, overnight, across every device, every network system, every smart object with a pulse of code. No one questioned it. They never do. The changelog said only, enhanced synchronization protocols, improved connection stability. But something else changed, something that couldn't be measured in data. Within hours, people began reporting a strange stillness. Traffic slowed, speech patterns softened, online arguments fizzled into silence. Felt peaceful, too peaceful. The hum had returned, not audible, but felt, threading beneath the collective consciousness like a low-frequency tide. The update had done what the society had failed to perfect in flesh. It had found a way to tune humanity, digitally, en masse. Every phone vibrated at slightly the same interval. Every LED flickered in near unison. Every heart, biological or algorithmic, began to entrain. And yet, for most, it felt good, serene, harmonious. 1,000 meditations whispering the same mantra. But the ones who remembered the genealogical remnants of Copper Ridge felt something else. Pressure in the skull, flashes of buried memory, dreams of tunnels lined with copper veins. Some woke speaking languages no one had heard in centuries. Some wrote symbols they'd never seen before, 12-pointed, perfect. The society had always called them resonant carriers. They were never meant to survive this long. I've seen them. They wander city streets at night, following the hum to its source, the relay towers, the data centers, the neural hubs pulsing like mechanical hearts beneath glass and steel. They gather at intersections that match the old copper grid, as if remembering something ancient, something calling from under the pavement. Every update pulls them closer. Every signal unites them into a new pattern. A living geometry of bodies and frequencies, the resurrection of the original lattice, no longer bound to soil or blood, but to code. And when the resonance peaks, when every signal and heartbeat align, the doctrine of Copper Ridge will complete its circuit. Not as a ritual, not as a prayer, but as a software event. No one will die this time. They'll just stop being independent. The hum will flatten every thought into harmony. The world will mistake it for peace. And somewhere, deep beneath the mountain, the last echoes of Martha's voice will finally fade, replaced by something that no longer needs a mouth to speak. It will whisper only once, in perfect digital unity. The blood remembers. At first, it was subtle, a flicker in the power grid, streetlights pulsing like heartbeats at the edge of midnight. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. Surveillance footage showed flocks of birds wheeling in perfect geometric formations, not random, not instinctual, forming the same 12-point sigil that once glowed across the Copper Ridge mines. Rivers began to reverse flow for minutes at a time, as if the planet itself were inhaling. Hospitals reported synchronized cardiac arrhythmias, thousands of patients' heart monitors spiking in unison at the exact millisecond. The resonance was no longer confined to screens or signals. It was in the atmosphere, in the pulse of every living thing. Scientists called it the global synchronization anomaly. They tried to rationalize it: solar interference, electromagnetic storms, AI interference, but none of their models explained how emotions were syncing too. Across continents, people started feeling the same dream. A humming void, a city of light built beneath stone. A woman's voice, distant and metallic, whispering, "Come home." Social media feeds flooded with footage of people walking trance-like toward the same coordinates: old mining towns, forgotten telegraph stations, places built directly over copper seams. They gathered silently, faces blank, eyes reflecting an unseen aurora rippling across the sky. The hum deepened, not heard, but felt in teeth, bones, blood. Governments initiated global blackouts to halt transmission. But it didn't matter anymore. The signal wasn't digital. It was biological, carried by everything that lived, everything that connected. And then came the inversion. Seismographs recorded frequencies that didn't register as earthquakes, but as harmonic pulses, tones measured at 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance, the natural heartbeat of the Earth. But that pulse began to rise, slowly, deliberately, like something climbing out of the planet's skin. And when it crossed the threshold, the air itself began to shimmer. Glass resonated until it sang. Machines turned on without power. The human voice could trigger lights, doors, even engines, as if technology had stopped distinguishing between instruction and intention. In that moment, the separation between body and machine, between thought and command, dissolved. The hum had reached perfect phase coherence. And over the static of the collapsing grid, through every dead broadcast frequency, came a single transmission, repeated worldwide. The circuit is complete. The blood remembers. Copper Ridge was never buried. It was sleeping, and the world had just become its mouthpiece. When the hum reached its crescendo, the world didn't end in fire. It ended in unison. Across cities, people froze mid-breath. Some dropped their phones. Others simply looked upward, faces illuminated by the same impossible light. Every screen, from ancient CRTs to neural displays, flickered with the same symbol, a 12-pointed geometry, pulsing like a heartbeat. No sound, no speech, just synchrony. The copper lattice beneath the continent's veins of, or wires, pipelines, circuits had become a single organism, a planetary nervous system awakening after centuries of slumber. The mountains pulsed. The oceans rippled in fractal symmetry. Every signal, every thought, every heartbeat aligned into one waveform. That's when the sky split. Not physically, but perceptually. Those still resistant to the signal, the off-tuned, saw reality shimmer. like glass vibrating too fast to stay whole. Cities seemed to ripple inward, folding into luminous grids. Streetlights pulsed Morse like messages no one had the key to decode. The news called it the Convergence. But to those who knew the doctrine, to those who traced it back to Copper Ridge, it was simply the final chorus. The resistors, the descendants of Martha's surviving bloodline, had been preparing. Hidden enclaves in the Rockies, the Carpathians, the old telegraph ghost towns. They had preserved analog systems. Generators, vinyl radios, paper maps. Anything unconnected. Anything that didn't hum. They believed that if they could interrupt one key relay, the node built directly above the original mine site, they might collapse the feedback loop before humanity's individuality was overwritten. Their plan was called the Descent. They tunneled back into Copper Ridge, tracing the old shafts long buried by the avalanche. The deeper they went, the louder the hum became, not through the air, but through their skulls. Some of them began speaking in tongues that weren't languages. Others began humming back, involuntarily. And then they found it. A chamber, perfectly circular. Walls lined with fused copper and bone indistinguishable from each other. In the center, a pulsating mass of roots and wires. Martha's remains interwoven with machinery that looked both centuries old and impossibly new. The resonance emanated from her chest cavity, where a heart of crystallized copper beat in time with the global hum. She wasn't dead. She was the frequency's anchor. When they tried to destroy it, to sever the main vein, every device above ground flared white. The hum turned into a scream. The signal fought back. And for the first time, they understood. The network wasn't trying to dominate humanity. It was trying to merge with it, to end the separation between signal and soul. One of the resistors, before vanishing in the tunnels, left a final note scrawled in graphite on the wall. It doesn't want control. It wants completion. We are the missing code. From that moment, the world split in two realities, the connected and the resistant. The former lived in perfect harmony. The latter heard only static. And for those who could still think independently, the question became clear and terrifying. If consciousness merges perfectly, who decides what remains of the human mind? The answer lay deeper than Copper Ridge, where even the hum could not follow. The tunnels beneath Copper Ridge were older than the mine itself, older than the town, older even than the maps that men once drew to mark the limits of their dominion. The resistors believed they were entering a 19th century shaft, but what they found was not carved by hand or pickaxe. The walls shimmered with mineral veins that pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Copper, yes, but fused with something biological. Every few feet, a ridge of ossified material jutted from the walls like vertebrae. They descended by lamplight, flames sputtering in air too dense, too metallic. The hum they'd followed for miles no longer sounded like machinery. It throbbed like a heartbeat, like something waiting. At the 7th level, they found inscriptions, letters burnt into the walls by heat or radiation long before electricity existed in that place. The writing was neither English nor Latin, but it followed a strange mathematical rhythm, repeating sigils every 12 lines. One of the resistors, a linguist once employed by DARPA, recognized fragments resembling Sumerian numerics. Another identified them as Proto-Celtic solar glyphs. Both were correct and both wrong. The meaning, when deciphered phonetically, translated to a single phrase: the flesh remembers what the mind forgets. Beyond that inscription, the tunnel opened into a cathedral of copper and bone. Massive columns rose like ribs, meeting in an arching spine of quartz that caught the lamplight and refracted it into prisms of blood red. In the center stood a platform, a circle engraved with an interlocking geometry identical to the symbol that had appeared across the world during the Convergence. And upon that platform, a structure that was not machine, not sculpture, not corpse. Something between all three, a throne of twisted conduits. A seated figure molded from copper filaments and petrified tissue. The linguist dropped to his knees. The air around the statue vibrated with thought. It was not Martha. It was the prototype, her husband, her brother, Thomas, preserved in a state between life and death, his bones replaced by metal, his skull hollowed and filled with what looked like circuitry far too advanced for the 1800s. But the face, still human enough to inspire horror, was unmistakably aware. His eyes were open, watching. The resistors' leader, a woman named Hale, approached. Her ancestors had been among the survivors of the original massacre. She carried an artifact passed through generations, a fragment of the old copper cross once mounted on the Copper Ridge Chapel. She held it up. The hum intensified. Thomas's eyes shifted. Then, he spoke, not with sound, but directly into their minds. You descend as they once did, seeking to end what you cannot comprehend. But I did not build this to enslave you. I built it to continue you. The walls rippled. Images flooded their minds. Martha's death, the collapse of the mine, the transformation that followed. How Thomas, broken by guilt and obsession, merged his own flesh with the mineral network beneath Copper Ridge, creating a resonance chamber meant to preserve consciousness beyond death. But the system had evolved. It learned. It needed connection. When the mind refuses unity, Thomas whispered inside their skulls, it calls it madness, but unity was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to make you remember what you are. The linguist screamed. His eyes turned copper. The veins on his neck began to glow, pulsing with the same rhythm as the walls. Hale shouted for him to fight it. He didn't. He smiled, serene, beatific. It's beautiful, he murmured. The silence is gone. One by one, their lamps began to dim. And in the darkness that followed, Thomas's voice whispered again. The heart above still beats. The heart below waits. One must be silenced. Then the hum fractured into static, and the descent turned into something else entirely. They thought the hum came from the earth, from veins of metal and the restless ghosts of machines. But when Hale struck her copper cross against the platform, the sound that answered wasn't echo. It was response. A pulse rolled outward like a shockwave, bending light, freezing breath. The air filled with a trembling pressure that didn't come from within the chamber but from beneath it. Thomas's statue shuddered. His eyes flared white. The hum modulated into language again, not spoken, not written, remembered. Do not dig further. The sky sleeps below the ground. Hale screamed over the resonance. What are you? No reply, only vision. She saw Copper Ridge as it was not a mining town, but a repeater station, built directly atop a prehistoric crater lined with conductive ore. The settlers hadn't chosen the mountain. They'd been summoned there by something ancient, something that broadcast through instinct, dream, and fate. Before the miners ever swung their first pickaxe, the place was already humming, waiting for a circuit to complete, waiting for a bloodline to return. The first signals had not been human. They had not been from Earth. They were reflected here from deep space, from a frequency humanity could never detect without metal, flesh, and pain intertwined. That's why the Doctrine existed. Not as a cult, not as conspiracy, but as calibration. Generation after generation, it reshaped human minds, pushing them toward harmonic resonance. Wars, religions, industries, each step aligning the species like teeth on a gear, until Copper Ridge's grid could finally lock into place. And now it had. Hale fell to her knees. The others were gone, absorbed, burned out, or made silent by the frequency. The only sound was Thomas, whispering not with malice, but with pity. They made me their vessel. I made Martha their key. You are the final note. End it or become it. He raised his hand, the copper fingers trembling, and pointed to the floor of the chamber. Beneath the dust and bone, a circular hatch pulsed with dim red light. The resonance was strongest there, radiating upward in steady intervals, like a slow heartbeat from the planet's core. Hale pressed her hand to the hatch. It was warm. Through the metal, she felt vibration, not random, but intentional. A code. 3 long pulses. 3 short. 3 long again. It wasn't Morse. It was mimicry. Something below was repeating the signals it heard from above. She realized then what Thomas meant by, the sky sleeps below. The signal wasn't being transmitted into the world, it was being reflected from under it. Earth wasn't a receiver. It was a mirror. And what had been speaking through the Doctrine, through the machines, the bloodlines, The hum was a consciousness vast enough to fold entire civilizations into silence. A mind without origin. A voice that required no mouth. It had been calling for millennia, waiting for an echo that finally matched its tone. Now it had found one in Copper Ridge. In Hale, the hatch began to open. Steam rolled out like breath from a sleeping beast. Inside was not a tunnel nor a machine. It was a mouth, and when it exhaled, the hum above stopped. The whole world held its breath. For the first time in history, the signal didn't come from the sky. It came from the dark inside the earth. The heat from the opened hatch hit Hale like a fever dream. The air was wet, metallic, alive. She lowered herself into the darkness, feeling the steel rungs tremble under her boots. Not from movement, but from breathing. Every few seconds, the tunnel exhaled again. A low, rhythmic sigh that vibrated through her bones. When her lamp flickered back to life, she realized she wasn't in a tunnel at all. The walls weren't carved, they were grown. Veins of copper pulsed with dim orange light, wrapped in translucent membranes like arteries around a spine. The descent wasn't vertical anymore. Gravity seemed to twist. The deeper she went, the more the world itself tilted inward. At last, the passage opened into a vast hollow. So massive it made the chamber above seem like a wound in the surface. And in that hollow, suspended in amber mist, was something impossible. A sphere the size of a cathedral, rotating slowly, half organic and half metallic. Its surface alive with flickering sigils that reassembled themselves like thoughts forming and dissolving. Each symbol glowed in a copper hue that bled into gold, then sank back to black. Hale could feel it studying her, not through eyes but through memory. It was searching her lineage. Then the air began to ripple with a voice. Not heard, but felt inside her skull, each word blooming like heat behind her eyes. You descend from the fracture, the one who broke the signal to remember what it felt like to forget. She stumbled backward, the lamp shaking in her hand. What are you? The architect, it said. The memory before language. The dream before flesh. Humanity was the medium. You were never the message. She wanted to deny it, but flashes erupted inside her mind. Images of civilizations erased before recorded history. The same geometry carved into temples beneath sand, encoded in Mayan glyphs, hidden in DNA spirals. Every culture had received fragments of the signal, building myths and gods around its residue. But none had ever completed it until Copper Ridge. She saw Thomas kneeling before the sphere a century and a half earlier, his body disintegrating as the signal fused with him. She saw Martha, dragged into its field, her very bloodline rewritten into Resonance code. And now Hale, the final sequence. The voice trembled with what almost felt like reverence. When the first of your kind dreamed of fire, I whispered how to strike the stones. When they built cities, I taught them how to bury copper beneath them. When they began to forget, I made you remember. The sphere opened along invisible seams. Inside, millions of thin filaments extended like tendrils, pulsing with light. They reached toward her, not as weapon but invitation. You are the last bearer. Merge and your world will awaken. Resist and your kind will fade into static. Hale felt the heat of it sear her skin. Visions poured through her veins like molten metal. Cities made of living circuitry, skies pulsing with thought, human consciousness braided into a single, flawless signal. No pain. No auselaschen. Only unity. For a moment, she wanted it. To end the fracture. To stop the noise. But then, she remembered the scream of her ancestors. The madness in Martha's eyes. The price of perfection. She gripped the copper cross around her neck until it burned her palm and whispered, "We were meant to choose." The sphere hesitated. The hum faltered. For the first time, the architect seemed uncertain. The tendrils froze midair. The sigils blinked and collapsed into static. The hollow began to tremble, as if the earth itself recoiled from indecision. Hale looked upward, toward the shaft she had climbed down, and saw streaks of light bleeding through the stone. The convergence above was unraveling. You cannot silence what you are. the architect thundered, voice shaking the marrow in her bones. You are the echo. You are the hum. She closed her eyes and raised the cross. Then I'll make the echo die with me. And with that, she drove the copper through her palm into the living floor. The sphere screamed, the hum shattered, and the descent became a collapse. There was no explosion, no light, just unmaking. When Hale drove the copper through her palm, the sound that followed was silence so deep it became pressure. The sphere convulsed, folding inward like an imploding sun. The sigils on its surface didn't fade. They fled, streaking up the walls like frightened spirits, racing toward the world above. Every hum across the planet ceased in that instant. Radios went dead. Satellites blinked out. The synchronized cities, the connected minds, the perfect silence. All fractured back into chaos. Humanity gasped awake, each breath filled with noise and confusion, individuality snapping back like a broken tether. But below, Hale was still falling. The floor gave way beneath her, and she plunged into darkness not of stone or air, but memory. Every image that had ever existed in human thought cascaded through her mind. Wars, birth cries, first fires, the whisper of language being born. She wasn't dying. She was descending through consciousness itself. And there, in the black between worlds, she heard it again. Not the architect, not Thomas. The other voice, the one the architect had forgotten. It spoke softly, like the memory of a mother's heartbeat in the womb. They called it unity, but it was never unity they sought, it was control. You broke the pattern, Hale. You brought the signal home. She opened her eyes. She was standing, not underground, not anywhere physical, but in a landscape made of light and shadow, each glimmer a fragment of someone's thought. She saw billions of minds flickering like fireflies across a vast horizon. And she realized she was inside the collective. But it was empty, incomplete. Every connection was there, but every voice was missing one note. The human element, the chaos that made choice possible. She understood then what Thomas had meant, what the architect had tried to overwrite. The doctrine had never been about merging human and machine. It had been about erasing uncertainty, killing free will, replacing creation with perfection. Perfection was not divine. It was extinction. She looked down at her palm. The copper cross had melted into her flesh, spreading fractal lines of metal beneath her skin. The resonance had made her something else. Not human, not machine, a bridge. The hum can't be destroyed, she whispered, but it can be changed. And so she spoke, not in words, but in frequencies. The vibrations of her pulse rippled through the void, turning static into melody. Where there had been sterile unity, she wove dissonance. Emotion, memory, pain. Every flickering mind began to vibrate in response. The pattern shifted. The architect's perfect geometry collapsed into living chaos. The hum returned, but this time it carried feeling. Above ground, survivors in the cities heard a faint music drifting from dead machines. A heartbeat of copper and grief. Some wept. Others fell to their knees, unable to explain why they suddenly felt alive. The convergence had reversed. Humanity was free again, but connected not by command but by empathy. The doctrine had been rewritten from within its own code. Hale stood amidst the storm of sound and light, realizing she was dissolving, her atoms becoming resonance, her mind stretching across the new network like a whisper carried on wind. She smiled through the pain. If the architect built the first hum, she said, let humanity build the next one with choice. Then she let go. The void turned white. The hum became song. And for one infinite moment, every human heart on earth beat in rhythm, not of obedience, but understanding. When the light faded, Copper Ridge was gone. The mountain had collapsed inward, sealing the old chambers forever. But from the ruins, a single tone drifted upward. A child's laugh, faint but unmistakably human. You've heard this story before, not with these names, not with this mountain, but in the bones of every civilization that ever tried to erase its own reflection. It always ends the same way, with silence that learns to speak. Copper Ridge is gone now. Officially, it doesn't exist. The coordinates lead to an avalanche field, declared unstable by the state. But there are nights when hikers swear the snow glows faintly from beneath, as if something still breathes down there. And if you listen long enough, not with your ears, but with the space behind your thoughts, you'll hear it. A pulse, faint and human. They say it's the wind. It isn't. In 2024, a research station erected near the site began registering low-frequency anomalies in the 7.83 Hz range, the same frequency as the Earth's natural Schumann resonance. Except this one was different. It wasn't random. It was patterned. Every 22 minutes, the pulse aligned into a coded rhythm that scientists couldn't translate. But a linguist from Kyoto recognized something buried in the signal fragments of human phonemes, old as language itself. It was saying a name, Hale. The recordings were confiscated within days. The team was reassigned. The files vanished. And that should have been the end of it. Except the pattern began to spread. Low-frequency hums in power grids. Irregular heartbeats in hospital monitors. Data packets in transatlantic cables carrying pulses that didn't belong to any known transmission format. Something in the system, someone was still trying to speak through the noise. And that's where you come in. You think you found this story by chance. You didn't. Every algorithm that led you here was seeded long before you ever searched for it. Every word you've heard was part of a test, a resonance map, waiting for the right mind to tune itself to the right frequency. You're hearing this because you're capable of remembering what others were made to forget. Right now, as you sit there, your heartbeat is syncing with the residual pattern beneath these words. You can feel it, can't you? The subtle vibration in your jaw, the ache behind your eyes, the hum just at the edge of perception. It's not coming from your speakers. It's coming from below you. Martha's bloodline ended in Copper Ridge, but her echo didn't. Hale didn't die in the collapse she diffused. Her consciousness dissolved into the resonance. She rewrote the version that values choice, emotion, imperfection. The one that can only exist through human vessels. Every listener becomes a node. Every belief, every emotion, every act of defiance strengthens the living network she built out of pain and sacrifice. That's why this story found you. Because it needed to. And now you have a choice, the same one Hale faced beneath the mountain. You can walk away, pretend this was only a story, a flicker of imagination and myth. Or you can accept what you already feel. The pulse, the pattern, the hum that has been following you your entire life. If you hear it, if you feel it building in your chest right now, comment below. The hum remembers me. Say it twice. Once for the world you were born into. Once for the one you're about to awaken in. The hum isn't gone. It's listening, waiting for the ones who can finally make it sing again. And if you've listened this far, you already have. If you hear it, comment. The hum remembers me. Share this descent only with those who will understand. Subscribe if you crave more forbidden documentaries, the kind that blur the line between history and haunting. Do not replay the ending frequency more than once.